The night my grandmother died, my parents didn't ask if I was okay, they asked if I planned to make trouble again. That was the moment something in me cracked for good. I'm Jarena Selwick. And I didn't even know they had already taken everything from her and claimed it as theirs. But the real betrayal wasn't what they stole. It was realizing they'd written me out of the story long before they tried to erase her last wish. And I had no idea that the truth was waiting for me hidden where they thought I'd never look. I came back to St. Mary's Bay carrying the weight of 6 relentless weeks spent cutting lines through wildfire smoke. Ash still clung to my flight suit when I stepped off the plane in Savannah. Stubborn in the seams no matter how often I brushed it away. I hadn't had time to process any of it, the missions, the exhaustion. The silence before the truth hit me harder than any rotor wash my grandmother had passed 3 weeks earlier, and I hadn't been there to hold her hand. The drive home felt surreal, as if my body moved on memory while my mind lagged behind. When I walked into my parents' house, the scent punched me first. Not cinnamon and old pine like my grandmother's home, no. It was harsh, chemical, a scrubbed clean smell that belonged to hospitals and cover-ups. My father repeated the same line he'd said on the phone, delivered with all the warmth of a tax notice. "You're late. Everything's been taken care of." My mother's red eyes weren't from crying. She wouldn't meet mine. That told me more than words ever could. Then came the blow. There is no will. We're handling the estate. 7 coastal cottages. Her life's work swept out from under me, without hesitation, without explanation. Every question I asked was dismissed. Every attempt to understand shut down. The first spark of suspicion lit in my chest. I stepped outside for air. And that's when Mr. Lewis hurried over, glancing nervously at the house before pressing a small envelope into my hand. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this." Inside was a slip of paper with her familiar shaky handwriting. "If they say there's no will, check the lighthouse." I drove toward the far edge of St. Mary's Bay with the note from Mr. Lewis burning a hole in my pocket. I'd lived here most of my life, yet I'd never once heard that my family owned a lighthouse. But when he told me my grandmother visited it almost every afternoon, something inside me pushed me to find it. The structure rose out of the cliffs like a forgotten sentinel. Paint peeling. Metal rails rusted from decades of salt and storms. The heavy iron door groaned when I pulled it, but it wasn't locked. That alone felt like an invitation she meant for me and no one else. Inside, the air was cool and dense with the scent of old stone and sea spray. I swept my flashlight across the curved wall until a jagged line in the mortar caught the light too straight to be natural. I pressed against it, and a loose panel shifted just enough to reveal a sliver of dull metal hidden in the hollow behind it. My breath tightened as I pulled the box free. It was military issue, sealed with a strip of brittle lead that cracked under my thumb. Everything inside was crammed together carelessly, papers, a small notebook, receipts, envelopes, all stuffed in without order. It didn't look like something tucked away for safekeeping. It looked like something hidden in a rush. The smell of fading ink mixed with salt hit me hard. For a moment, opening the notebook felt like crossing a line I shouldn't cross. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what I already suspected. Her handwriting wavered but remained unmistakable. One entry read, "Someone wants me to change what I've already decided." Another, written in a smaller script, said, "I don't know if I should tell Jarena yet." Behind the notebook rested a draft of her will, my name written clearly beside the responsibility for all 7 cottages. She had never mentioned this to me, never hinted at any change, never hinted at fear. Under the draft lay receipts for roof repairs, plumbing fixes, fresh paint, every single one paid for by her alone. None of it aligned with what my parents told me. A warped, water-stained page at the back stopped me cold. The ink had bled, but the message was still legible. "They're coming tonight. I don't want to sign what they're bringing." The words sliced through the silence of the lighthouse. She had been pressured. Someone in my family brought something to her door, and she refused. When I finally stepped outside, the late afternoon light hit the sand in a way that revealed faint footprints leading away from the lighthouse prints, not washed out by tide or wind. Someone had been here not long before me, someone who knew exactly what they were looking for, and someone who might return. I drove to see Hester Donnell as the sun dipped low over Pelican Row. Her porch light flickered to life as I walked up the steps, and she greeted me with the same gentle steadiness she'd shown my grandmother for years. When I mentioned the lighthouse, she paused, the expression in her eyes shifting from warmth to worry. She told me my grandmother had always feared someone close was trying to take something meant for me, but she never explained what. When I pressed her for more, Hester let out a long, careful breath and told me about the night before my grandmother was hospitalized. She had gone over with homemade soup and saw my father leaving the house, clutching a stack of yellow papers. When she stepped inside, my grandmother seemed unsettled, moving things on her desk as though something should have been there and wasn't. Hester imitated her soft voice. "Something isn't where I left it." A chill spread through me. I asked if she knew what the papers were, and Hester nodded slowly, remembering a moment she hadn't understood until now. My grandmother had mentioned earlier that week that she had finally finished signing something important. She had sounded relieved. Signed, what with whom? Why was nothing left behind? The pieces fell together too smoothly to ignore. The will wasn't a rumor. My parents had access to her office, and she had been afraid enough to hide everything in a place no one thought to look. Before I left, Hester gripped my hand with surprising strength and said, "You'd better brace yourself, dear. Truth in a family like yours never lands soft." I walked back to my car with her warning echoing in my chest, knowing something deeper and darker had only just begun to surface. I walked into my parents' dining room, holding on to the last fragile piece of hope I hadn't already lost. The familiar wooden table sat in the center, but the warmth I associated with it was gone. My father watched me with an expression sharp enough to warn me before he even spoke, while my mother stood near the counter, twisting a napkin so tightly it threatened to split in two. I sat down because standing felt too much like bracing for a blow. My father got straight to it. "There is no will, and we need to settle the estate. No mention of her, no softness. Just a declaration delivered like a business update." They pushed a thick stack of folders toward me, supposed proof that they had paid for repairs on all 7 cottages. I skimmed the documents, and my pulse jumped. The signatures were wrong. They were too rigid, too clean. None of the gentle tremor that marked her handwriting near the end. I pointed it out, but my father shot back that I wasn't an expert, that the documents were perfectly legitimate. He stared at the papers instead of at me, as if making eye contact might crack whatever story he'd practiced. Then the first blow landed. An invoice for roof work dated the exact day she had been in the ICU. I asked him how she managed to sign anything while hooked to machines. My mother's breath hitched. My father accused me of twisting facts, said I always assumed the worst. But the worst was still coming. A real estate flyer sat half hidden within the stack, showing Cottage 4 freshly photographed and prepared for sale. I asked who approved it. My father snapped that it was their house. They're right. Something inside me split at the words. I pressed again, asking where the renovation money came from. My mother stumbled through an excuse about paying for it all, promising they just hadn't shown me the documentation yet. But I had already seen the truth in the lighthouse. Every bill paid by my grandmother alone. Their story was unraveling thread by thread. When I finally asked if my grandmother had ever talked to him about her intentions, he muttered the line that ended whatever remained of my trust. She changed her mind. She had to, forced to. The room felt suddenly smaller. I pushed my chair back and walked out before the weight of it all crushed what was left of me. The hurt inside me didn't fade. It hardened into resolve. I went straight to my grandmother's attorney the next morning, replaying every word from the night before. His office was neat and lined with framed legal certificates, a place meant for order and honesty. When he looked over the draft I handed him, all color drained from his face. He remembered it clearly. She had come to him wanting to update formal documents. They simply hadn't finalized everything yet. He turned to his computer to retrieve her file. Nothing. No folder. No documents. Not even remnants of a draft. He dug deeper, opening the access log. And there it was, a single unauthorized login during the week she died. He stared at the screen for several seconds before saying someone had deleted all of it. He clicked into the device identifier tied to the intrusion, SLWD. 3. The sequence lodged itself in my ribs. Grant used that format. Grant, whose life had slid off the rails in recent years. Grant, who knew his way around falsifying signatures. Grant, who owed my father too many favors. Before I could voice the dread forming in my chest, the attorney added something else. My grandmother had emailed him a PDF labeled Final Version, saying she'd planned to sign the official copy with witnesses that week. But the file never made it into the system. Someone stripped everything clean right after she sent it. Then came the detail that tightened everything into a single point my father had dropped by the office that same week, unannounced, asking questions about ownership rules. At the time, it hadn't seemed suspicious. Now it felt like a missing puzzle piece sliding into place. I thanked the attorney and stood. My voice steadied even as my pulse raced. I told him I wasn't letting this go, that she would never leave without making her intentions known. And when I stepped out into the sunlight, only one person held the next piece of the truth. Grant. The wind swept hard across the beach that afternoon, kicking sand against my legs as I approached Grant sitting alone near the waterline. He looked nothing like the boy who used to race me along this shoreline. His face was gaunt, his eyes glassy from too many sleepless nights, and his hands shook as he rolled an empty soda can between his fingers. When I mentioned my grandmother, he didn't even try to hold my gaze. He just muttered that he didn't want to be part of this anymore. I told him about the unauthorized access in the attorney's system, and his reaction cracked the truth open. His shoulders sagged as he admitted my parents had asked him to clear out old files, to tidy things up. He insisted he never knew it involved anything important, repeating that he needed the money, that he had no idea she was already that sick. Hearing it didn't absolve him, but it did show me he wasn't the architect, just a crumbling link in a chain someone else forged. Then came the detail that changed everything. My father had shown up at Grant's apartment with envelopes of cash, telling him to erase anything that could confuse ownership, and even directing him to reset her email password. That was no accident. That was intent. But the twist hit even harder. Grant confessed he had saved a copy of what he deleted because something about the whole situation felt wrong. He stashed it in the lighthouse storage room, the place my grandmother trusted most. That small spark of conscience might be the only reason the truth survived. Before I walked away, he warned me in a hushed voice that he wasn't alone the last time he visited the lighthouse. Someone had followed him, someone quiet.
Sweetie.
The wind suddenly felt colder. I looked out at the darkening horizon, knowing exactly what I had to do next, even if it meant stepping into danger. Twilight had just slipped away when I returned to the lighthouse. The sky above it was streaked violet, and the wind moaned through the cracks like a warning. The metal door screeched as I pushed it open, and the spiral stairs hummed under my steps as though they remembered the last person who passed through. The storage room below was colder than before. My flashlight cut across the space, revealing small signs that someone had been here, boxes shoved aside, a map on the floor. The faint smell of fresh sweat mixed with salt. Whoever it was had searched quickly, desperately. I dug through the crates until my fingers brushed a weathered anti-moisture bag wrapped in old military cloth. Inside was a silver USB, marked with my grandmother's handwriting. I plugged it into my laptop, holding my breath. Her face appeared on the screen steady, focused as she signed her will. 2 witnesses stood beside her. A mobile notary pressed a stamp. It was real, legal, final. Then the footsteps came, slow, heavy, above me. I shut off the flashlight and held still, tucked behind a crate as a shadow leaned over the railing, watching the darkness. My heart hammered hard enough, I feared it echoed. After a long, suffocating moment, the figure stepped back and disappeared into the night. When I reached my car, the driver's door was cracked open. Nothing was stolen, but the seat had been pushed back as if someone had waited inside. Fear and resolve collided in my chest. I gripped the steering wheel, the USB safe in my pocket. It was time to bring everything to the courthouse. The morning wind at Camden County Courthouse cut straight through my coat as I climbed the steps with the USB tucked against my chest. My boots still carried sand from the lighthouse, leaving faint trails across the polished floor as I walked into the courtroom. My parents were already seated. My father leaned back with the confidence of a man who believed the ending was already his. My mother tried to look composed, though her trembling hands betrayed her. I kept my eyes on the judge's calm voice, sharp gaze, while my parents insisted there was no will. They waived repair invoices, claimed they alone cared for my grandmother, even argued that I was never meant to inherit anything. Hearing my father say it aloud tightened something deep inside me. When my attorney connected the USB, the room stilled. The video appeared my grandmother signing the will in her pale blue sweater, her hand shaking but sure. 2 witnesses followed. A mobile notary stamped the page. The truth unfolded without room for denial. The judge reviewed every piece, then let out a quiet, almost amused breath. "Well, this is interesting." My mother collapsed into her seat. My father's confidence vanished. The judge froze all property transactions, granted me temporary control, and ordered a full investigation. I didn't feel victory, just the weight of my grandmother's trust settling gently on my shoulders. The mediation room was warm but unbearably still, the kind of quiet that pressed against my skin. My father sat rigid on the left, his hands trembling even as he tried to fold them together. My mother looked worn down to the edges, her eyes sunken from nights spent pacing instead of sleeping. The mediator's voice was gentle when he said we were there to find a path forward, but I could feel the tension pulsing beneath every word. I let the mem speak first. My father finally broke, his voice rough as he admitted they were buried in debt, years of unpaid taxes, bills stacked beyond control. The cottages had looked like salvation, the only escape from collapse. My mother's tears slipped free as she said they hadn't meant to cut me out. That fear had twisted everything. Fear of losing me, and fear of losing everything else. The betrayal still hurt, but beneath it, I felt something more complicated: grief for what our family had become. I told them I would take over the cottages, no selling, no mortgaging, but I wouldn't let them fall apart entirely. Something in them eased, a tension loosening at last. Then Grant stepped in, voice unsteady, saying my grandmother wanted me to continue what she couldn't finish. His apology was small, but honest. The mediator ended by saying no one had won. But at least the truth had finally surfaced. Sometimes justice wasn't a blow, it was clarity. The first morning back in St. Mary's Bay felt different, lighter, calmer. As if the town itself exhaled after months of tension. Dawn spilled across the cottages my grandmother painted years ago, brushing their mint, yellow, and sea-gray walls with a soft glow. I stood on the grassy footpath with the full ring of keys in my hand. They no longer felt like a burden forced on me, but a responsibility I was finally ready to shoulder. I started at House 3. The door sighed open, letting out the familiar scent of sun-worn wood and distant waves. Inside, the magnolia painting my grandmother loved hung slightly crooked, exactly how she would leave it before fixing it with a small, amused shake of her head. I straightened it gently. Papers for repairs were stacked neatly on the table, waiting for someone to pick up where she left off. I moved through the house, making a list of what needed attention. Talked briefly with the renters next door, and checked the rental rates she always kept fair. None of it felt like work. It felt like honoring the rhythm she lived by. When I stepped outside, my parents were standing on the edge of the lawn. For the first time, they weren't defensive or guarded. My father simply said they would help if I ever needed it. My mother handed me a small bag of cookies, my childhood favorite, her eyes soft but cautious, as if hoping for a fragile truce. It didn't erase anything, but it was a beginning. My phone buzzed with a message from Grant. Rehab was hard, he said, but he was finally facing himself, and he thanked me for pushing him toward the truth. I looked out over the water, realizing this was the first time in years I felt something close to hope for my family. Damaged, imperfect, but not lost. Later, in the main house, I sat at my grandmother's old desk. The breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of salt and pine her scent. I opened her journal to a blank page and wrote, "Justice isn't always a storm. Sometimes it's a steady light in an old lighthouse, revealing what someone tried to hide." When I closed the journal, it felt like she was there, smiling, 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 smiling.